Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. So Jess, tell me how your week's been.
Well, I actually went to a conference on Wednesday this week about AI in media, and it was interesting to get, I think, another perspective. And I was on a panel about what we think AI is going to look like for next year. So it was kind of fun to talk about that. And I actually met someone that I would love to have on to talk about agents.
Nice.
But in general, it was fine. It wasn't a bad conference, but also the room that it was being held in, like the venue, was like 1,000 degrees.
No.
I know. I was like there in the morning, but I was kind of doing some stuff in the green room. So I wasn't really in the room a lot. Like I saw some panels, but that was about it. And then I had to go to a lunch. And then I came back later in the day right before my panel. And apparently people were just leaving because it was so hot in the rooms. My panel was at the end of the day. So by the time we got to the end of the day, it was like completely empty.
It's so weird because normally those conference rooms, they just blast the AC and you're just
well, I think it was a very old building. It was a very cool building. It was like down by Westminster, and it was one of those big old Georgian, like it was like the Society for Civil Engineers or something like that. And it was like a big old lecture hall. So I think that was part of it, is like they probably just don't have a ton of control over the heating system in that sort of building. It's either freezing cold or boiling hot, and there's no in between.
I'll take freezing cold for those conferences though.
Yeah. How was your week?
Well, I came back from a wedding in
that's right.
in Mexico, which was spectacular, super fun, really, really nice, beautiful wedding. It's been raining down in Mexico. Well, it's been raining here in LA too, but with rainy season, but like for 1-2 glorious hours, like the sun came out, had the wedding ceremony. So like it was really
that was
nice.
good timing.
But,
what's the
came back with a little bit of the Montezuma's revenge.
Oh, so, no.
I will spare all the gory details, but
yes, please do.
It's been a rough couple of days. But I'm on the mend. We're okay. By the time this pod actually comes out, I'll be right as rain, I hope.
Just stay hydrated. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, exactly. I've been catching up on my shows. Let me tell you that.
Oh, well, that's never a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so this week we are going to continue our conversation about conversational commerce, which is something that we touched on a couple of weeks ago. And really, this is like what the future of shopping is.
I think it's particularly timely because a lot of these tech companies are really targeting the launches of these shopping tools for the holiday season. I think that's going to impact what's happening in the industry quite a bit. So I think the timing couldn't be any better.
Which is why I asked my friend and colleague Natalie to come on today to talk to us. She's been working at this intersection of commerce and tech and data for a long time. And she and I, have been talking about conversational commerce for months and months. So it's exciting to finally get to talk about it with her on the pod.
Yeah, I mean, she's the real deal. I think we've been talking, you've definitely been talking to her, and even I've been talking to her. She's been watching the trends at the ground level for, the last year or more. So I'm really interested about her perspective on this.
And she's got a really interesting background that I will let her talk a little bit more about, but it means that she really gets the business model side of things and what it means from a business and consumer perspective, kind of even more so than the tech side of things. So that's a really interesting perspective that she's coming from.
But I think for this episode, we're not just talking about the tech. We're talking about what this actually means for how commerce works. So if you're running a small business right now, or your early days in your startup, the decisions you make in the next few months about how to show up in conversational commerce versus maybe the more traditional search is really going to matter for your business in the short term and also in the long term.
So we're really excited to talk to Natalie today and help us unpack all of that. And we're going to be talking about what's actually happening, why all the platforms are fighting, and what you should actually be doing about it. Right. We would like to welcome our guest this week, my friend and colleague, Natalie Lethbridge. Hi, Natalie. Welcome to Early Adopter.
Hi, both of you, Jess and Kyle. It's a real privilege to be on here because I listen to your podcast every week. And I have to say, I'm a bit intimidated. You guys are so good at simplifying the complicated and getting to the nitty gritty all at the same time. So I hope I'll be up to the task.
Oh, of course you will.
I'm
So
sure you will. We're very
exactly
excited to have you, especially to talk about what we're talking about today. I think you're the perfect guest to bring on for this.
Is that because we're all obsessed with this topic slightly?
Yes.
I think that's
Sometimes I wish
exactly
we
it.
just recorded like our kind of off the cuff conversations that we have, and we could post those too.
It would be a
Yeah.
nightmare to edit, though, because we do bounce around from topic to topic a fair bit.
Yeah.
So hopefully today will be a little more structured. But that is actually a nice segue into today's topic, which is all about conversational commerce. We touched on this a couple of weeks ago, just to give some background and some education. All of this in mind with getting Natalie on to talk about this, because this is, again, something that Natalie and I talk about almost all day, every day. So we're very excited to bring our conversations to the pod. So Natalie, do you want to give a little bit of your background and tell everyone why is this interesting for you?
Well, as you know, I've got a fairly broad background. I started as a lawyer, and I also started launching TV services for Disney around the globe. And from there, went into streaming and then service development, then created my own company 14 years ago at the intersection of content, monetization, and tech, as streaming and the cloud was really creating all sorts of opportunities, with data obviously at the hub and also the consumer at the hub of that. So I had the privilege of you coming on board in early this year, and we've been working on all sorts of exciting stuff. And now I also do something for the European Institute, which is I'm their UK representative for the European Institute of Technology and Innovation in the cultural creative sector, looking at all of this for European companies, essentially. So that's me in a nutshell. A bit obsessed by everything that's happening right now because we're living in such an incredible time of movement and change.
Yeah. And one of the things now that I'm super excited about is we've been talking about how this topic of conversational commerce is going to reshape retail, SMB commerce, and all that. And I think when we started having conversations, or when we first met, you were one of the people talking about where this was all headed before it really started to gain a lot of steam. So I'm really excited to have you talk about it, what you've seen, the trends that have kind of evolved over time, because again, you were talking about conversational commerce way before we even figured out what the term was called.
Yeah, we were trying. I remember the early days. We were trying to figure out what it was going to be called, and I don't think the ground's completely settled yet. I think we're still learning a whole lot of new acronyms, unfortunately. But it's real. It's here. I think the reason for that is I've always been a little bit at the intersection of large companies and platforms, smaller SMEs, and content creators and enablers. I'm very conscious about the SME struggles in all of this and the problems of a fragmented marketplace. I've also seen the rise of the platforms and what it's done to the commercial models. So it's easier to kind of see where this is going to go when you've experienced what has been. And even though it's something completely new and at a different pace, there are some similarities.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's important to note for our audience is that this isn't necessarily one of those hype buzzwords that's trending right now necessarily. I think Natalie's experience helps us to identify that this is something that's really happening. What retailers are doing is changing. How AI vendors are pitching or talking about this, how the consumer journey, like in terms of purchasing, is really starting to shift. All of those things are happening, whether you've experienced it yourself, seeing how your purchasing behavior is changing. Like, this is really a fundamental shift that's happening. You're seeing the next wave happening play out. And so we want to kind of capture that and talk about it so that, people can prepare, especially as the holiday season starts to come up. It's going to really be a shift for this year.
Totally. And I think that is a nice segue into just doing a little bit of a reminder of what we actually mean when we're talking about conversational commerce, because we're throwing around this word. But it's important to just do a little reminder about what we mean by this topic. So, Natalie, do you want to give an interpretation of what conversational commerce means to you?
Okay, I'll
I'll
try.
put you on.
I think
It's
you
okay.
guys
Well,
are
I
so
can. We
good
can.
at creating the simple explanation. I mean, my explanation is very simple. It's about shopping at the point of inspiration, and it's actually the realization of a frictionless ability to search for what you want and shop for what you want when you want it. That's my definition. You may have a different one.
I love that line, shopping at the point of inspiration. That's great.
I think that's exactly what it is, Natalie. You've given like the almost the theory behind it, and the practical level of that is that you're having a conversation with an LLM like ChatGPT, and you are having that back and forth while you're looking for an item. So it could be something like, I need new running shoes that are under $50 that don't have too much cushion and are in this color pattern. And you're having that back and forth with ChatGPT, and ChatGPT goes away and finds that for you. And then it comes back and you can purchase that within ChatGPT. So you are not going to the Brooks website or to the ASICS website or to the Nike store, any of that. All of that is happening within ChatGPT rather than you going to all of the individual pages, which is what traditionally we have done for a million years. For the
Yeah.
entire amount of time that e-commerce has existed.
And we can unpack that. And I think the key important thing is that the ability to shop online is not new.
Yeah.
E-commerce is not new. What is new is the environment in which it's done and the ecosystem in which it exists and is enabled, and what that does to the business models, what that does to the data flow, and so forth.
Yeah, I love that distinction. And I think to kind of add on to that, AI that helps your chatbots helping you shop. But I think, Natalie, what you're getting to is that it's so much more than that. There's a whole ecosystem involved where now it's actually the AI is moving from assistant to maybe more delegation. So it's all about actually how do you give some of this autonomy? And we've talked a lot about like the autonomy of AI agents, and going up this ladder of autonomy. I think conversational commerce, it kind of fits in line with that autonomy. It's giving the AI the delegation to, you want to do some level of shopping, you want to see something, and actually giving them the autonomy to go get that. So, they understand your intent. They can compare options across retailers, check prices, look at reviews, and then actually complete the transaction for you. So I go back to your AI shopping at the point of inspiration. You have the inspiration of what you want, and then the AI is delegated to actually go make that purchase decision for you based on your objectives. I mean, that's a very big shift from the, we're clicking a bunch of things, looking at reviews ourselves, and then trying to come up with a purchase decision.
I always talk about what a nightmare time I had when I was furniture shopping. And Natalie, you probably remember this because you remember my hunt for a bed frame. It was like my obsession. And I had this one really specific idea in mind. And I mean, I scoured every imaginable website in the UK and the US. And I think now, and I'm like, God, if I'd only had this ability to do conversational commerce, a couple of months ago. And I did try, but it was just too early days, I think, for this to happen. And God, it just would have made my life so much easier, and I would have saved an awful lot of time rather than going to every furniture website on the planet.
I think Chat 5 has been a sort of step change in all of this, to be honest. I think it's created a much more thorough ability it's much more thorough ability to actually get in there and have relevance. It works better.
That's a great segue, actually. Why, kind of into the why now? So maybe talk a little bit more about that, if you don't mind. GPT-5 is a big step forward. What are some of the other kind of components of why this is finally clicking now, and why this might be that evolutionary step in shopping?
I think we're in a very different phase here. We're really in a phase where your actions stay in the same place and are all within the same universe. So the key challenge in the past has been the delegation of the action out, initially through referrals. And even then, Amazon has tried to build an ecosystem which enables it to have multiple touch points and get to a point where you are able to navigate the entire marketplace within them, but they haven't been able to yet. So this is kind of the last barrier for that. It's basically shaping a customer relationship within the same place in the same ecosystem without farming it out to a platform. It's quite fundamental. It's shaping the customer relationship and the shopping logic itself, and that is transformational.
Natalie, you touched on this when we were first talking about this, and this is something that you and I talk about a lot. The idea of friction within shopping is a really big thing, and I think that the ability to shop within an LLM, the ability to do this kind of method of conversational commerce is a really interesting way of removing friction.
There's a couple of ways of talking about this. One of them is the customer experience, which I think we can all talk about, which is the fact that companies and publishers pay a lot of money to position their content or their goods. And basically the design of the search actually takes it out of their own website and ecosystem into someone else's, and that data becomes owned by someone else. And they don't have any ability to track attribution outside of that. So that's the old model, and attribution is a big part of how that model works. The people who
I'm gonna ring what I call my jargon buzzer. You may have heard it on the pod.
Yeah, so the
what do you mean by attribution?
Attribution basically means the ability to follow where the consumer, you, are going to, and try and figure out why you're going there and track you. And that's obviously been changing. And the owner of that data that allows you to do that now is the platform, and that's part of their power base. That's also part of how they are able to monetize and understand the value of what you're doing. But if you are a retailer or even a consumer, there's the irritation of having to click and then re-click and then click again, and then either you click through a link into the brand's website, or you click into Amazon. Amazon's whole obsession initially was with this one-click delivery, because what did Amazon do that was so different that enabled it to build its platform? It simplified the aggregation of all of these small players into a single place to shop, and it simplified the user journey obsessively into actually delivering that shopping experience to one click, but it's still a click, right? What this does is collapse all of that. There's no click. There's just a conversation that takes you straight to where you want to be. And if the only click you make is the point of purchase and query whether you even do that, if you've trained your agent to do that on your behalf. So it's quite a transformational model. And there's some underlying pieces there that are important to understand, including how you track the data flow, who owns the customer, who owns the agent, which we'll be talking about in more detail as we get into this whole conversation. So there's that perspective, and then there's the business model perspective, which I think is always important to remember, and that is who is earning what, where, and what's happened to that business model with web-based search, and with Amazon. Platforms make a lot of money by creating a cut on both transaction and, in some cases, also on referral. So you're losing as a retailer or a publisher, you're losing a lot of value on the way. The other thing that happens is that all the data is being aggregated behind a closed wall on the other side of the wall and not to you. So your ability to control both the user experience post your own website and also the value and the ad environment isn't there. So that's given an incredibly powerful position to the platforms. This is the learnings we have of the last 20 years, and this is where this kind of environment is completely upending all of this.
Natalie, I think one of the things that I heard in what you're saying I thought was really poignant was how Amazon simplified the user journey. That was really like what was pivotal to its success. I think when we think about kind of this AI conversational commerce, there's a big part of why this is probably going to be so successful is that how conversational commerce is able to now further simplify this purchasing process, rather than a couple clicks. Now it's just a very natural conversation of what you want. There's a lot that goes into that. We talk a lot about the infrastructure that's required, how LLMs can reason through multiple steps, how the infrastructure exists around this in terms of APIs and protocols. what are some of those things that you think are really kind of useful to this ecosystem that's enabled or is simplifying this whole process? How are you seeing that kind of play out?
I think we can start by really looking at some of the stuff that's happening recently between Amazon and Perplexity, for instance, as an illustration as to what's happening and why they would fight over it.
Do a little reminder of that story. So essentially, Amazon is suing Perplexity for allowing their agent to shop on the Amazon website. So essentially, someone is using Perplexity. Perplexity goes away and is looking for a product on the Amazon website. Not just the Amazon website, but it is one of the options. Amazon is suing Perplexity and saying, actually, that's not allowed. You are committing fraud. And the thing to remember is that Amazon have their own agent that is
Rufus.
Rufus, yes, which is they've estimated that it's going to generate an additional 10 billion in annualized sales for them, right? So on one hand, they have their own agent. On the other hand, they don't want Perplexity's agent shopping on the Amazon site because Amazon has their own agent. So just as a little reminder of the background of
Yeah.
this story.
And both Rufus and Amazon have been a bit naughty here and disingenuous because they also have Amazon everywhere. And so they have also been going on a walkabout to other people's websites and,
Yep.
and environments and bringing it in. So the idea that Amazon is now accusing Perplexity of doing what it's been doing for a while is a little contradictory. However, we still have to look at why. Why would Amazon want to make that lawsuit? Is it purely about doing what they say, which is protecting their customer experience and making sure that the customer has a unified kind of access and protecting their customers' privacy? I think it's a little more than that. From my point of view, which is the vantage of media, broadcast, and publishing, it's about much more than that. And it kind of goes to the fundamentals of what's happening in the whole ecosystem here between the existing platforms and this new open kind of environment. Um, so it really is about protecting Amazon's core business models and Google's and others, while Amazon frames it as a case for upholding platform rules, protecting customers, having a uniform quality experience and aggregation. It's a little bit more of an existential concern. If agents like Perplexity's Common can navigate Amazon's marketplace on behalf of the users, they can bypass Amazon's entire kind of ecosystem and influence. Influence is important here because Amazon's ecosystem includes native ads, paid placement, and typically control over how products are surfaced to the shopper and the data that navigates those products. So it's a massive data hub. Amazon doesn't just risk losing ad revenue, it also is ceding part of the power to shape the customer relationship and shopping logic itself, which is really what's at play here. Because if we go back 25 years, this is the big SEO internet platform play was exactly that, controlling all of the user data and monetizing that over various products that it developed over time. And this is exactly the same play here. So in a world where agents make those choices independently, the platform becomes more basically a logistical provider. Amazon clearly has a head start there. But it becomes more of a logistic provider than a gatekeeper or a place of discovery. And that's kind of not where Amazon wants to be. At the moment, Amazon really wants to be Zeus at the top of the mountain and have everyone climbing the hill to get to the god of all things.
And I like the point being follow the money. So there's ad revenue models that are at stake here. There's a whole recommendation engine that Amazon has built to get you to purchase more and more as you go through that experience. So there's a whole, like you said, ecosystem of what Amazon has built that you're bypassing if you enable, Perplexity and Comment to do this.
Yeah, and you have to look at Perplexity's argument too, because it's an important one. And that argument says your AI agent has the same rights as you do. It's pretty powerful. And there's the whole question of who actually owns the agent. Is it you as the user or is it the platforms? So do they have a point or is Amazon's right to block third-party agents valid? Perplexity's point that users should be able to authorize agents as their proxies, that kind of resonates strongly if you're for an open system, particularly if you look at it from an SME perspective, especially for anyone who's fought for open access. And, the key thing is balanced competition. So I'm looking at my world of content distribution. It's not that balanced. And so do we want to make the same mistake twice and have a sort of binary system where the balance of power lies with the platforms? If the agent is genuinely acting with my consent as an individual, whether I'm the retailer or whatever, if the agent is genuinely acting, or the purchaser, and it's following my credentials and operating transparently, and that's a big if, then blocking that agent becomes a form of monopoly, or I wouldn't say that's a bad word, but becomes a form of marketing closure. It's disadvantaging me potentially, both as a consumer and independent creator or an independent retailer. What's interesting about Amazon's approach in this lawsuit is that it's really behaving like a legacy media company. It's behaving in a defensive way rather than trying to open up innovation. And that is fascinating given where Amazon was 20 years ago
I
and
think
Jeff
that was,
Bezos'
yeah, that was even the
original
title
cost.
of the blog that Perplexity did about this lawsuit, was something about Amazon is blocking innovation, essentially. So that is their defensive position.
Yeah, but remember, Jeff Bezos is the person who wrote the seminal work about how you build and what the golden rules are for innovation on the internet. So, this is a 180-degree turn.
I think it's also worth flagging, Natalie, because I don't think we mentioned it when you introed yourself, that you have a legal background, which
I
is
do.
but it's quite useful in this particular context, because I know that you haven't been a practicing lawyer in a while, but you still look at things with your legal hat on.
Yeah, I
And
do.
I think
You can never take the lawyer out,
No, you definitely
it's
can't. But I think you're looking at it from a really interesting perspective that perhaps anyone who isn't a lawyer will be looking at it from, because you're looking at this idea of like, is blocking the access of the agent actually blocking access for the customer? Like, that's why this lawsuit's going to be so interesting to see how it plays out, because it's answering some pretty big questions.
Yeah, and there are some legitimate issues there that we, as lawyers would look at. Security is important, fraud, and, from a commercial point of view, from a commercial point of view, the experience and the quality of the experience, those can be presumably addressed through standards and protocol, which are already being implemented in open ecosystems. The question is how robust they are and how likely they are to become a common framework. Blanket bans seem to be more about protecting the platforms, and I hate to use the term monopoly, which as a lawyer I would be concerned about, than user welfare or user rights. So question is, what happens if Amazon wins the lawsuits, and what does it actually close off for consumer? I personally believe, and I know you guys do, that we're kind of at a pivotal point here, and this is why this case is so important. On the one hand, you have the pro-open systems, and on the other hand, you have the walled garden approach, and this is kind of a test case for that, and it won't stand alone. Whatever the decisions and the outcomes will profoundly impact the positions that other platforms take. And I I think we can take it back to, well, if I'm an SME, and let's face it, 90% of businesses in the US, 99% in Europe are SMEs. In Europe, of those 99%, I'd say 78% are enterprises with less than 10 people. Does this potentially redress some of the balances that they've had? Because we've seen what Google has done over time, and Amazon indeed. It starts off open, and you think this is a new marketplace, and then it builds commercial terms that are either more restrictive and onerous and really eat away at profit margins for the SMEs. So that experience on the internet can't be ignored, and we need to think about where the balance is. Unfortunately, the way that people tend to think about this is very binary. So my question, and my question to you guys too, is, does it have to be binary? Is there a best of both worlds? First of all, let's see what the outcome of this lawsuit is, and then also let's see what protocols are in place and how standardized those protocols become before we can really answer that question.
I also think it's very interesting that Amazon went after Perplexity. Perplexity are a little bit of a punching bag because they are
at the moment.
yeah, they really are. They're involved in a number of lawsuits, and some of them like really legitimate, like their scraping lawsuit with Reddit. But some of them are a little bit a little bit more interesting, like this one. I think if they had gone up against OpenAI, who are very pro the ability for anyone to shop on any platform. They're the ones that really have pushed this ACP, which is the agentic commerce protocol platform, which is essentially the rails that allow anyone to shop within ChatGPT. I think that would be a very different story if Amazon was going up against OpenAI, because I think that would really be a battle of the heavyweights. On one hand, Amazon, who want that walled garden, closed access, versus OpenAI, who want that open access and anyone can shop within OpenAI.
Yeah, and let's look at who OpenAI partnered with.
Mm-hmm.
It was marketplaces that
Mm-hmm.
represents SMEs essentially.
Yeah,
So
the Shopifys
yeah,
of the world.
Yeah,
Right.
Shopify's
exactly.
and Etsy's, yeah.
Yeah. So as a reminder, when OpenAI launched their instant checkout or buy with ChatGPT, not that long ago, just about 6 weeks ago, it was very recent. Their launch partners were Etsy and Shopify. Since then, they've announced a partnership with Walmart, which is kind of the complete opposite of SMEs. But it was very intentional that they started with Etsy and Shopify, and I think that's the really key thing to focus on.
Yeah, I think there's another thing too that's really interesting, and that is we all dream of a single interface for the whole market that simplifies everything. So,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean? We feel that's convenient, transparent. If Amazon prevails and locks out third party agents, what does that mean for that? That means that, yes, there is one unified, potentially ecosystem, but it's designated and determined by a single operator or two or three, as is, some of the ad capabilities and the data capabilities online. So that is important. The other question that raises is what you guys talked about last time, which is a merit system based product surfacing and the whole search of products at the moment, and we're in this kind of interesting time where it's possible again to actually surface your product on merit rather than on paid search.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, you and I talk a lot about Etsy for a variety of reasons.
Yeah,
And,
we
when
do.
when Etsy first launched, it was this kind of open marketplace where any
Yeah.
artisan could come and provide access to their goods. I think the problem with Etsy is that over time, I think especially post their IPO in, I think it was 2014 or 2015, they have shifted much more into that kind of Amazon style marketplace where it's become much more corporate. They have sponsored ads, so they're always going to prioritize those sponsored ads, et cetera, et cetera. So it almost feels like this OpenAI integration with Etsy is kind of going back to the original purpose of Etsy, which is, just the best product rather than the paid for product. So I think that's also really interesting.
And Etsy and Shopify do represent the open, distributed backbone of agentic commerce and all the
Mhm.
freedom that involves. Networks built for SMEs, creators, and independent brands, not closed mega platforms. And that's an interesting place right now. And I think we need to actually be brave enough to really think historically and think about what we allowed and we didn't allow and what that resulted in. If you were talking 3 years ago to publishers, and even now, they are kind of hidebound by what the major platforms impose on them. So let's think about what they can do to actually take advantage of this situation.
Yeah, I think what we kind of keep going around is kind of this idea of who owns the customer relationship. And,
Mhm.
and I think that monopolistic lens and kind of the competitive pressures is really interesting to delve into. If everything is behind an AI layer, who owns that consumer? And it feels like this is what that battle between Perplexity and Amazon is really going to help decide who owns the customer layer. Where does the permission lie with a lot of these AI agents? Because honestly, we already delegate a lot of decisions. There's price trackers, auto filling, recommendation engines. The Perplexity is just a somewhat more advanced version of that, of what consumers already expect. But really, what Amazon and Perplexity seem to be fighting about is who is allowed to own that consumer. And I think this will help decide a lot of like if the agent is the user or is not the user.
Yeah, and at the moment on the internet, we know who owns the consumer data. It's it's the Googles and the
Mhm.
Amazons, and and those that have, who are the platforms they own and they track most of it. So OpenAI hasn't come out cleanly with that. There is a real concern about transparency here. I talked about attribution, but the point is, who and where do you get transparent data on all of this, and how can you protect your ability to get transparent data? And I think and I think that's an important point, because when we look at how publishers and content owners, for instance, in my world, and it will include retailers, negotiate their deals with the LLMs, and I suspect that Etsy would have had a more robust discussion. But 2 years ago, when they were trying to move from scraping to a blanket license agreement, I bet not many of them negotiated attribution protocols, which forced a recognition of the original content owner. I bet that was possibly overlooked and yet it's absolutely critical in order to be able to create a return path at some stage and own authorship of your goods and your data.
So I think it's worth now throwing a new one into the ring, and that is Google. Because speaking of Google, they actually just had some announcements around this earlier this week. So the timing, as always, on this conversation is perfect. So they've just announced major agentic shopping updates. They've got this thing called Shopping Graph, which is powering conversational search. So essentially, you describe what you want, you get results with visuals, prices, reviews. Their Gemini app now has shopping features built in. They've now got something called agentic checkout. So they'll buy items for you if the price drops to your target budget, which is really interesting. And they've got partnerships with Wayfair, Chewy, which is a pet supplier in the US, Quince, which is a clothing manufacturer, and Shopify, again, with Shopify. So they have this really interesting, almost hybrid version. So let's talk about we've talked about it a little bit, but let's go a bit more into it with Amazon's walled garden approach, which we've talked about, OpenAI and Perplexity's open agentic commerce approach, and now this kind of hybrid version that we're starting to see with Google. What do we think about all these different variations? I think it's actually a very interesting illustration that we've got quite usefully laid out.
And I'm going to remind you, Jess, of the conversation we would have had 5 months ago about Google. We really didn't think they were keeping up.
No, they've
And
really upped their
wow.
game. Yeah.
And wow,
Yeah.
have they been over delivering in the last couple of months. It's been
Yeah, they
really
really have.
impressive, and at a speed which is also impressive. So I think the key thing about the shopping graph is it's Google's hedge, isn't it? It's its hedge across both systems. It's a partially walled but open to partnerships. It's that hybrid response is amazing. It's retains some data and ranking control, but it's opening enough rails to mitigate regulatory risk. And this is where regulation comes in, and this is where my legal mind comes to get really excited. The landscape becomes messier and more open in the search monopoly era. So they've learned from their past mistakes or their past success that is a regulatory risk. And they are looking at creating a system where they know they can win, but they can also enable some interaction. Remember that they're also planning, and they have certain structural advantages. They have their GAMs, they have their ability to have a whole bunch of
Buzzer. What is a GAM? Let's just remind people what a GAM is.
You explain it better than
I
me.
can
I'm
explain.
sure.
So GAM is Google Ad Manager, and it's essentially like the central hub through which you run an ad. It's the easiest way to explain it.
Yeah, so therefore, what it is all the data that surrounds that,
Yeah,
and it's a
exactly.
very it's an extraordinary set of data that people use across the ecosystem, and it's certainly, I'd say, the default data provider for
Yeah.
anyone trying to do research in this space and build campaigns. So they have that already, and that's a pretty strong competitive head start. So they can almost afford to be a little magnanimous and let Amazon carry the regulatory risk here by developing a hybrid status. And by the way, it also means that they get to understand where the two sit with each other too. So they get to hedge their bets and go with the flow, and they're very good at that.
Okay, so all of this, I think, dovetails nicely into something that Natalie, you and I talk about all the time. In fact, we've done a whole white paper about this. Kyle, you and I talk about this all the time. And
Yep.
we talked a little bit about it in our last episode on conversational commerce, but let's get into it about what it means for this particular conversation. And this is the idea of the two-tier internet. And to just give a really simple explanation of what the two-tier internet is, it's this idea that the internet will kind of split into two. It will be an internet for humans. It'll be the traditional browsing version that we're all used to. Because remember, not everyone is going to want to use an agent for a variety of reasons. There are going to be a lot of people who just want to keep doing what they've been doing for the last 20 years, and that's cool. Then the underneath layer that's going to be underpinning everything is this idea of the agent layer of the internet, the agent tier, and that is essentially like these rails, like train tracks, if you will, that will make it really easy for agents to go and do the thing that they need to do, the thing that they need to purchase. So this is the idea of this agentic commerce protocol. It's basically just like train tracks that allow the agent to go and do the purchase for you. So right now, like essentially what Amazon is doing is putting a big gate down on those rails and not allowing an agent into their ecosystem. OpenAI is setting up rails that easily allow you to shop within a Shopify store, within an Etsy store. So that's essentially what the two-tier internet is. It's this idea that there will be an internet for humans and an internet for agents.
Although it's interesting to note that even within the agent side, there's a little bit of a fork or a split where we're seeing we talk about Amazon having their own proprietary agent and kind of walling off Perplexity. Similar things will probably happen with Google and Meta and all of these, where you have their agent to shop their ecosystem, but then you also have this open web of agents. This is the ChatGPT, the Perplexities, Shopify and Etsy enabling their infrastructure where those agents are able to look across multiple websites and then interact with those websites using the agent commerce protocol and those rails that you talk about. So there's also a little bit of a difference in terms of how the agents are going to interface with the rest of the internet. So a lot of different shifting parts happening within even the agent side of the two-tier internet.
Natalie, here's a question from a business model perspective, because you're very good on the business model side. Do you think that there will be a shift towards this hybrid model that Google's looking at purely because they're going to limit their customers? If you, like, at some point, you're losing customers if you don't allow this hybrid model where you have access both on, through OpenAI and Amazon? Or do you think that Amazon thinks that they're too big to fail, essentially?
Well, I think if we switch it around and think if I'm an SME or I'm a content creator, what does it mean for me via Amazon? Two tiers means there's more opportunities for discovery, options, which is a big issue, searching and finding stuff in an incredibly crowded marketplace, especially for SMEs and creators. But it also means fragmentation and some complexity. So who do I trust? Who do I not trust? Which loyalty program works for me? And I can engage with? Which fandom is going to bring me some value? So regulation and better protocols provide some security there. But at the end of the day, it's offering simplicity. It's offering the ability to deliver your goods in a reliable sense. So trust is a big issue, even though you earn less. But if I'm an SME and I'm used to the internet, am I also going to be able to understand what it takes to build relevance also on a chat platform, which which is not without work. You need to be able to rethink how you structure your content, how you build your content, how you're relevant. So there's a whole lot of new skills to learn. Is that going to happen easily? I'm not sure. So I think Amazon is kind of relying on the fact that it takes a lot to change consumer behavior. And chat's relying on the fact that there's already been mass adoption of their simple kind of conversational search. You and I, Jess, were talking about some impact figures that are starting to come out, which show that on conversational search alone
Yeah.
is deemed to be anything between 6 to 11 times more impactful
Yeah,
than
Shopify just came out with those numbers.
yeah,
Shopify
with
just said that
SEO.
it
And
was
what does
yeah.
that mean in terms of transactional capability? We haven't quite seen that yet because it's fairly new, all the conversational commerce stuff. But I would suggest that for a while now, we're going to have two rails that they're going to go on. And why not? What's making them have to choose one or the other, unless Amazon does the bold thing of wanting to impose exclusivity on its platform? If it does that, it's really going down a really interesting regulatory challenge, which I suspect Google will avoid given its hybrid environment. And that kind of explains to you a little bit why Google has chosen the hybrid model as well.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see this hybrid behavior. Google building the shopping graph, but also plugging into Shopify merchants, Walmart partnering with
Yeah.
open players while
Correct.
building their closed systems, versus Amazon,
Yeah.
who's going kind of all in on their walled garden. And to kind of bring it back to our audience, what might seem a little overwhelming is that for brands and for SMEs, you can't only do one. So if you only optimize for the closed systems, you're losing that ownership. If you only optimize for the open systems, you're then going to lose that Amazon first buyer in that experience. So unfortunately, or maybe just the opportunity is that you have to kind of be everywhere, but maybe you can shift in terms of like where you see the most margin or where you see the most loyalty from your customers coming through. But I do think what's interesting is that this does enable the kind of playing field to be a lot flatter. If you're, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more. If agents are becoming the primary way people shop, what needs to change for merchants or for SMEs to get discovered, and how does that look given the two-tier internet system? So I think that's something we want to cover a little bit more for how people can be, what people can do to be, more discoverable across the two tiers.
Yes, because if you're not in the conversation now,
hmm
you're not going to be relevant in the future. And that's why this is a critical moment.
But the good opportunity is there's a lot of quick actionable steps you can take now so that you are part of the conversation. You don't get left behind.
So, can we say that we're moving from what was a multi channel strategy under the internet to an omnipresent strategy under the two tiered internet?
I love that. Natalie,
Yep.
maybe you can explain that a little bit more, because I think that is gold.
If I'm someone who is a strategist and deciding where to spend media budget,
Mhm.
I started off thinking I only needed to spend it in one place, TV, and then if it's a digital budget, I only needed to spend it in one place, Facebook, and then I realized it was Facebook, it was TikTok, it was a whole bunch of different platforms in order for me to do well, and I had to do it slightly differently for each platform. Now we have this other whole new kind of platform and way of being discovered and seen. So rather than call it multi-channel,
Mhm.
as in digital online channel, we call it omnipresent in both internets. So both present in conversation and present in search SEO
Mhm.
online across multiple platforms.
Love it. I think we're going to coin that right here and now. That concludes our interview with Natalie for this week. We look forward to bringing her back on again for next week. So this week in AI News of the Week, we've got this story about Yann LeCun leaving Meta. And I know on the surface that sounds like a pretty typical Silicon Valley executive drama, but I actually think that this is quite an important story underneath the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be really interesting about what it signals to where the AI industry and especially, AI talent is going.
So for people who don't know, Yann LeCun is like one of the 3 people who have ever won the Turing Award, which is for
Mhm.
pioneering deep learning. He basically built Meta's entire research operation. He's been there since,
Mhm.
I think, 2013, so he's been there for quite a long time. And now he's leaving because he's frustrated with the direction that the company is going, which is very interesting.
And he's not leaving because he got a better offer somewhere. So it's not like he's going to one of the other big AI players because he got offered, billions of dollars. He's leaving purely because he disagrees with Zuckerberg about what AI should be and where Meta is going with their AI strategy.
He's been saying for years that large language models have real limits and that they can't actually reason, which is something that we are, pretty aware of. Their pattern recognition tools. They can't plan like humans do. But Zuckerberg has really gone all in on LLMs. Whew, that's a mouthful. And he recently hired this guy called Alexander Wang for $14 billion to lead a super intelligence team.
That number is just wild. Just seeing some of these headlines paying $100 to $250 million per engineer to pull people from companies like OpenAI and Google, it's a really strong signal in one direction.
Yeah. And so LeCun was basically like, I'm going to go work on world models instead. And that's a really interesting, very different approach to AI, which is more around learning from video and spatial data, which is essentially learning about the world around you to actually understand physics and cause and effect, not just predicting the next word, which is what we see with the LLMs.
Yeah. And a quick little aside, as a learning model, only focusing on text is very limiting in terms of what you can and can't interpret in pattern recognition. And at some point, we will need to focus on the video and the spatial data to really have like general reasoning. But that's a topic for another day. So,
yeah, exactly.
So where I think this matters to our audience right now, all of the tools you have access to, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, name that tool. It's all built on the large language model bet. That's the architecture that's getting massive funding. That's the thing we're talking about all the time. That is kind of our big AI umbrella for now. That's what everyone is racing to scale.
So if you're a founder who's kind of thinking about what to build into your workflow or what to invest in, you and everyone, it's not just, one individual, everyone is betting on this LLM direction. And I think if Jan LeCun is right about the limitations of these, then I think it's going to cause a lot of issues.
Yeah, if LeCun's right, then the tools that we use could hit a ceiling. And I think the fact that someone like LeCun is frustrated enough to leave just is worth listening to and monitoring and seeing what that means in the future.
So we also have this other story this week that is, kind of a perfect counterpoint to this very serious conversation. And this is honestly one of the most welcome developments that I've heard in a while. So I am thrilled about this story.
So OpenAI has apparently finally fixed the M dash problem, EM dash problem. Yep. So this is how ChatGPT became obsessed with M dashes and started using them everywhere.
Oh, it's like their signature, like along with the rocket ship emoji. It really meant that you could spot AI text from a mile away just because it would throw in a random M dash everywhere.
And you couldn't really get it to stop. I mean, you'd have to actually put in your prompt, hey, don't use the M dash. But it would just kind of keep using M dashes. It was just really, really popular.
Well, it was popular for OpenAI or for ChatGPT. I don't think the average user was very thrilled with it because a lot of us have been using M dashes since way before, AI came along. But it really makes AI so detectable and the outputs are just still like so obvious and identifiable that there's this one specific punctuation quirk, even though some of us were using it way before it became a thing.
And it has its use. But Sam Altman called this a small but happy win that they finally fixed it. So this week on our AI gone wrong story, I really think this one's interesting. The story is JP Morgan Chase is letting managers use AI to write performance reviews. And look, I totally get it. No one really likes doing performance reviews for both sides, both from the manager and the employee side. So managers hate writing them, employees hate receiving them. Yeah. Then you have to like critique each other's. I mean, it's a really awkward process. No one's happy. So the appeal of using AI here is totally understandable.
It's been a while since I've had to do a performance review in this sort of way, but it was always the absolute worst and my brain would completely go blank. Like everything that I had done in a year when I was, because you have to do like the one for yourself and then they do one for you and then you compare and all that bullshit. Like that is the one sort of thing that if anything could be automated or improved upon, it would be great for that to be one. But
yeah, where it gets tricky is the tool they're using has something called talent signal that's labeling employees high potential, typical, or pay attention after 90 days. So now it's moving from AI helps with efficiency or AI helps you to write your performance review based on your own feedback to actually AI is making a judgment call on the employee or the manager's performance and slowly maybe turning into an AI making the decision.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like those applicant tracking systems where, you might be super experienced, but if you don't tick the exact boxes that the AI is looking for, you're not going to get through. And that is a real problem because it's cutting out people who could be entirely qualified. They just don't tick those exact boxes. But also, if you're an employee and you're reading your performance review and you're like, is this actually real? Like, did my boss actually pay attention to me or did ChatGPT write this? And I think it really it becomes a credibility thing.
We know that managers have AI tools, and everyone is offloading their thinking to the technology right now. And obviously, we encourage that kind of human oversight piece.
Yeah, and I don't think that AI shouldn't be used for performance reviews, and I think it can. I just think it's how it's used. So, like summarizing feedback from the year, you organize peer input, or remind managers of things that you forgot. Like those are all things that I think are really useful. Or you you do a brain dump, and it can summarize your brain dump. Like I think all of that is really useful. It's just when it's used in this particular way, I think it's not great.
Plus, you
Yeah.
can't really have a conversation with an algorithm. So
No.
I guess it depends on what that communication feedback mechanism looks like with the manager. But also, let's say you then talk to your manager and he goes, "Oh, actually, no, you're doing great." Then it's like, then why did you label me? And is that going to
Yeah.
follow me in this company? And it's just setting a bad precedent.
Yeah. So I think the lesson here is just because AI can do something faster doesn't mean that you should let it. Sometimes that human involvement is actually the most important thing. And there are some things that perhaps you shouldn't be using AI for. Right. So we have covered a lot of ground here. We've got Amazon versus Perplexity, Google's new tools, the two-tier internet, what all of this means for SMBs.
And I can imagine that if you're listening in, you're thinking maybe that's a little overwhelming. Like, how am I going to do that? All of that? How am I going to do what I've been doing for the last 20 years around my business and add all of this new legwork?
Well, that is exactly what we're going to be talking about next week, because I think the theoretical behind it is really important, but the practical is where it really matters for our audience.
Yeah. So next week, we're going to come back with Natalie to talk about the actual playbook. So now that we've kind of set the playing field, we're going to give you some concrete steps you should be taking right now to make sure you're discoverable in conversational commerce, but also how you optimize for both the open and the closed systems.
So definitely make sure that you tune in for that. But in the meantime, if you want to keep the conversation going, we are all over social. We're on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube as @early_adopter.
And honestly, if you found this helpful, please share it, like and subscribe and do all those things on whatever platform you're on. But also drop us a review on your podcast app. It generally helps us to get in front of more people who need to hear about this stuff.
And if you have thoughts or questions about conversational commerce, make sure to hit us up. You can email us at hello@earlyadopter.ai.
Remember, no E in the adopter.
Yes, no E in the adopter. Thank you for flagging
So
that.
we'll see you next week when we get into the playbook for SMBs and conversational commerce. Thanks, Jess.
See you next week.
Bye.